Where could we be watching this beautiful fire? Only one place, Christmas Eve 2017 with Kenny.
Oh,
Andrew.
good evening.
Good evening and Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.
Thank you for hosting us once again.
And thank you for coming.
Now, what has changed in the past year?
Ooh, this has been a year.
It's been a year.
It's been a year. Let's see. I mean, the big events are Jessie had a baby.
Oh, congratulations.
Riley Rose back in May. Jeffrey graduated from law school as valedictorian of his class.
Excellent.
And that was, I guess, in June. And then in October, Travis graduated in the top 10% of his NYPD Academy class.
Ooh.
And now he's been assigned to the 44th precinct in the Bronx, which is one of the most active precincts in the city. And that's,
Those are some highlights.
the children, yeah. For me, things have been going pretty smoothly. I am looking to wrap up my career in education, maybe this year. I'm not 100% sure, but this is my 40th year in education.
Wow.
So 40 years in the desert, I think it's time to move along. So it may be that time. I'm not 100% sure, but I have to let them know by March.
So let me ask you the question, and that is, how did you first get interested in education?
Ooh, that goes
Because
way-
your father was a pilot.
Right, my father was a pilot, but my grandfather always told my father that he should have been a teacher.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so my sister and me both became teachers. And in part because that was my father's style. He was very much like when we sat down at the dinner table, my father, because he was an international airline pilot, we would watch the news. And the news was, and we'd always watch the international part of the news because that's what he was interested in. And because of that, that sparked a lot of conversation at the dinner table about what was happening in the world. And he had a good style of kind of drawing my sister and me out into discussions and debates and conversations about what was going on. To the point where a lot of times I would get up from the table, run over to the encyclopedia, and find a reference that we could use, in our conversation, discussion, or debate.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was, and my sister became a social studies teacher. And I always had a kind of a leaning towards working with disadvantaged kids. It was always it was always something that interested me. I was curious about it too, just because, it wasn't, it was something out of my normal world. So looking at these kind of, seeing those kind of kids, I said, gee, they could use something. And I was curious to see what that was. Hence 40 years of special ed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Has special ed, I mean, this is an obvious question, but, obviously it has changed.
Hugely.
And hopefully for the better. But what do you think the biggest change today compared to 40 years ago?
40 years ago, yes, there was more of a stigma about being in special ed. A child was more clearly designated into special ed because they had clear deficits.
Right.
And it was clearer. Then what wound up happening is people saw that, the small class sizes, it was, on some level it was an advantage to be in special ed because, especially if you were from an urban setting where maybe the family the family lacks structure, or both parents are working, or there's no parent at home. Single parent families have become almost the norm these days.
Yeah.
And because of that, it seems like there needs to be more parenting going on, and it's not happening in the home. So a lot of people find that they use special ed to kind of achieve that extra bit of parenting that they can't give the student in their house. And of course the students become designated special ed primarily. In this case, these aren't physically handicapped, these are emotionally handicapped. So a lot of it has to do with just not being well disciplined, behaviorally educated, in the home, so that they don't the students come to our program with not good role models on how they're supposed to act. And that's what I found the big thing was.
Yeah.
You know.
Boy, 40 years.
Yeah.
Has it changed you personally, going through this 40-year process of teaching? How has Kenny changed in 40 years?
Well, Kenny was a lot more of a straight, middle-class, World War II baby boomer, and not on the wild side of that so much. I mean, I had my wild moments, as every adolescent does, but I went to parochial schools. I went to Archbishop Stepinac High School. It was all males boys school, high school. So I would consider myself pretty straight and pretty stiff. And when I first came into special ed, I looked at these behaviors and really was not very tolerant of them. Because I didn't understand them. I thought, these kids are just making this up. They're faking this. They're manipulating. And then I started realizing, as the years went by, that no, this is really, I don't want to use the word feral, but some of these students that I work with are wild children. They have not been raised by adults. They've been raised by peers on the streets.
Right.
And that took me a long time to get, not a long time, but it took me a while to get a handle on that, to understand the differences between my background and their background. And then I developed my styles and adapted myself to meet the needs of that population.
And yet you still had the bug to fly.
Well, that's my father. Yeah, there's certain things that I felt important to continue. It's in part because my father did die before my children were born.
Yeah.
I wanted to hold on to these things that was special to him and made him special to us. That I could give them. So in part, I carried over the flying was very much him, and I carried that over. Yes, and I got involved with the Civil Air Patrol, which is also another program, and ultimately becoming the wing commander of New York State. So I moved up in that program, and that kind of gave it was a nice nod to my father and his legacy.
Yeah. And what do you think is, when you fly, is it I hate to say that, is it a high experience? Is it, what kind of feelings do you go through when you're actually going through that whole process of flying?
There's a precision to flying. And they say it over and over again. I mean, flying is no more dangerous than any other activity that we do, but it is much less forgiving of error.
Ask John Denver.
Right. John Denver is a good, and there's many examples. Philippe Cousteau is another one. But there's a lot. And sometimes you can't avoid it. Sometimes it is a failure of the machine that you can't control at all and you couldn't find out on the ground. But sometimes it is something that you can't afford to miss. So when I'm after flying or when I go to work and I see people who are kind of lax and loose in the way they do business, I realize they can do that because they're on the ground. And their actions don't have the criticalness that it does when you're flying an airplane. Flying an airplane keeps me sharp.
Okay. So it is not a time to have your head in the clouds. It's actually a time to be more precise, more sharp, more cognizant of everything.
Well, on a nice day, once you've gotten off the ground, let's face it, most of the tragedy in aviation happens when you're closer to the ground.
Right.
So, once you take off and everything's going smooth, the systems are all working right, and you have your panel in front of you and you're scanning your instruments, and everything's going good, you can look out the window and enjoy the view. That's part of the fun. Especially these days, now that I have a seaplane, it opens up a whole new realm of what I can do. I'm not limited to landing at airports anymore. I can land on any decent body of water.
What is the most exciting place that you have visited, that you've flown to?
That I've flown to. Most exciting.
Or,
Well,
picturesque?
One of the most interesting things was when I first bought my first airplane. I bought it down in New Orleans. And I went down to look at the plane, and we were getting checked out in the plane in the middle of Mardi Gras season.
Wow.
So, and then flying it back, and even the check rides, going through the bayous and all that, it's a very unusual country down there, in the Mississippi Delta area. So that was kind of fun doing that. I enjoy flying up in the Adirondacks because it's mountainous.
Right.
And mountain flying, especially when you're close to the ground, gives you, it's much more interesting. You're flying nap of the earth type of thing. So that's fun.
Okay. Great. Any flights on the horizon? Like, any trips coming up?
Well, not so much on my plane, but yeah, we're planning on going probably to Florida sometime during the winter because I want to get some training in this airplane down there. But I'm not taking my plane. I'll simply rent one like it down there, and that's going to be. We're not sure if it's going to be February or March yet, depending on.
Tavares, Florida is very big into seaplanes.
Right, Tavares.
And that's near me. I'm in Mount Dora.
Where?
Mount Dora, Lake
Dora.
County, Florida.
Okay, yeah. Well, I did some training in this plane out of Winter Haven.
Winter Haven. Okay, yeah, that's
That's
I
like
know where
in the
it is.
middle of lake country there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the airport's at GIF. That's the designated for that airfield. But yeah.
Great. Well, again, thank you.
And thank you.
Thank Marcia for again hosting, opening up your house for us, and Merry Christmas.
And thank you very much for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you.